Hello, YouTube divers. This is WaterDive122, and I want to welcome you all to another episode of the podcast for high school sports all across Western North Carolina. High school is finally back into session, or at least it is here where I live. And today was actually supposed to be the third day of school. And I actually, on a normal day, I'm at school learning everything I can, and not making these videos. But because of the recent bad weather that's been hitting this area, the district decided to call it off. Thankfully, it's not a virtual day. Otherwise, I'd probably be up in my living room working my butt off. So, thankfully, it's not a virtual day, so I can actually make time to record these videos for you guys. So, what's on the itinerary for today? Well, we've got a lot of sports headlines here to cover, specifically the Brevard football COVID issue, Brevard volleyball things, and how this bad weather has affected our sports practices, and of course with the pandemic and stuff like that. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So first off, we're going to talk about the Brevard football COVID situation. A few days ago, when Brevard was having their inter-squad game, someone on the team was carrying COVID, and it was only a few days later, from what I've heard, that the player was tested, and he tested positive. And so that forced the entire football facilities to suspend operations for the rest of this week. Which, as a result, led to the postponing of Brevard's opening game against P.F.H.S.A.A.W.N.C. Now, I actually kind of had mixed feelings about this postponement, because part of me kind of doesn't want Brevard to miss this game, because this is a very important game, and I do want to see our boys beat a hated rival here in this community. That is the Pisgah Bears. I want to see our boys beat them before I graduate, and they only have this year and the following year to do so. So they don't have long to do so. And I don't even think it might be this season where I finally see Brevard beat Pisgah, an old rival, an old foe. Yeah, that's gonna be a great game. Hopefully, it won't be like the 38-0 atrocity that we got from Brevard last year. Hopefully, it'll be a lot more competitive than that, I guess. And then the other part of me is thankful that Brevard doesn't have to play Pisgah this year, or until we can figure out when we postpone the game. I'll get back into that in a second. But part of me is thankful that Brevard doesn't have to play Pisgah this year, simply because next Friday, Brevard hosts perennial and annual state championship contenders, the Robbinsville Black Knights. Now, you might be thinking that I would feel pretty confident going up against a very, very small school like Robbinsville, but Robbinsville has won more state titles in football than any other football team here in Western North Carolina. Yes, that even includes A.C. Reynolds. Surprise, surprise. Robbinsville is without a doubt one of the scariest football teams in this region, and probably in the entire state. Like, a lot of people underestimate how small they are, but they carry big, big, big bodies on their team. Every time I see highlights on the local news broadcast from Robbinsville, they just absolutely make it look easy. They have a great rushing game, they have a great offense, and that defense, it's kind of on and off. They can allow a lot of points, but they find ways to win. And that's honestly what makes Robbinsville as good as they are. And the fact of the matter that Brevard has Robbinsville in Brevard is a big advantage for us, because Robbinsville doesn't, from what I understand, Robbinsville doesn't really play a lot of teams on the road that has a turf field, and Brevard is one of the few teams in this area, one of the teams in this area that does have turf fields, that does have a turf football field. So that might be a disadvantage to Robbinsville, but you know, given how good Robbinsville is, I don't really see how that would be a disadvantage to them. But Brevard usually has a knack for playing great teams, like take Mountain Heritage, for example. They play Mountain Heritage extremely tough. And, we almost beat them last year. We lost 8-6. But it was a great game nonetheless. Now getting back to the Robbinsville game. When you play a good team like Pisgah, and then you follow it up with a matchup against a perennial state title contender like Robbinsville, then you actually want your teammates to heavily prepare for the Robbinsville game. And with Pisgah, that's a big wall in our Blue Devils' way. And with this postponing of the Pisgah game, that gives our boys more time to prepare for Robbinsville. Because believe me, we're going to need all of the preparation we can get for when we play a team like Robbinsville. It's going to be grinded out football there. I'll be looking forward to that game. Okay, so with that said, we are now going to transition on to volleyball. Brevard High School volleyball has started practice for this week, preparing for next Monday's away game against the East Henderson Eagles, another former Brevard rival, and you could also make the case that they're still big rivals of Brevard. I have looked at our schedule endlessly on Max Preps, and East Henderson is one of those teams that could be really good or really bad. I mean, East Henderson has already lost a game this season against RS Central. They lost 3-0. So that gives me a little bit more confidence that Brevard will have the guts to beat East Henderson, because when they played East Henderson first last season, they lost, but thankfully they won the second game. But Brevard ended up 5-6 last year. A bit of a down year compared to the state championship runner-up run that we had in 2019. But overall, do I think Brevard will be that good again? Probably not. But do I think that they will beat East Henderson? Absolutely. And of course, my predictions here, I'm going to say Brevard wins this matchup 3-1. Start off 1-0, and East Henderson at 0-2. Or 0-3, because they play AC Reynolds next. Who knows? But overall, I do think Brevard will have another strong season in volleyball, but they probably won't be a state title contender. They won't. I'm going to say they make the playoffs, but they're more of a state quarterfinal, state semifinal contender, not really a state championship contender like they were in 2019. It was basically a combination of my hype from the 2019 season, which was absolutely magical, and then my skepticalness, if that's even a word, of the mediocre season we had last year. Overall, I think Brevard will make the playoffs, maybe win a couple of playoff games here and there, but they probably won't make it back to the state championship game. I mean, I want them to, don't get me wrong, but depending on who we play in the playoffs, that might be like a give or take solution. So, with that said, go Blue Devils. Pulling for you. All right, and the last thing, how has this pandemic/weather has been affecting sports practices across this area? Many of you already know that Tropical Depression Fred devastated parts of northern South Carolina and western North Carolina And now we got another tropical storm on the way, and then, of course, the Delta variant wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. How has that affected teams across the area? Well, let's start here in Transylvania County. I'm not going to go too much into detail about the stuff that happened, like in South Carolina, because, that's like for another day. But let's talk about how this has crucially affected a lot of the teams around this area. So let's start here with Brevard. Obviously, with the COVID-19 breakout that we had a couple days ago that I talked about a little earlier in the video, yeah, that's affected us, and as a result, our opening away game against Pisgah got postponed / canceled. I don't freaking know. And then the weather came, and that has led to the cancellation of all the marching band practices for this week, which is kind of weird because we still need to learn the show with a new director and with a new interim band director and with a couple of rookies here and there. And yes, I am one of those people that do classify marching band as a sport because, there's like competitions and, there's winners, there's losers, there's basically everybody in between. But the only difference is that you're going up against a lot of schools, not just one school competing against another school, like in football or in volleyball or basketball or baseball or things like that. So yeah, I am one of those people that do classify marching band as a competitive sport. So you might hear my marching band stuff on this podcast. So stay tuned for that. Anyway, getting back to this review, the weather factor, thanks to tropical depression Fred, has basically spawned a lot of flash flood warnings and watches, and even some tornado watches. This tropical storm was so bad, and it was also so bad that it flooded literally the entire town of Rosman. And all you Rosman folks out there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I saw the photo of downtown Rosman, and it was completely underwater. And I think over these past few days, Rosman hadn't even been in school. Like, they had an early dismissal on their first day of school, from what I understand. And that was just crazy. How do you get a early dismissal on the first day of school? Oh yeah, bad weather exists. But overall, this area has received a lot of storm threats. Not just here in Brevard and Rosman, but pretty much everywhere. I mean, Mitchell County was under a tornado watch for a while, and I think in some parts they were even under a tornado warning. Now, of course, here in the southern counties of western North Carolina, there were like flash flood watches and flash flood warnings, things like that. I've already talked about the flooding in Rosman, and even the French Broad River here in Brevard was rising, and oh my goodness gracious, because my house and basically the bed and breakfast that my family owned for a while is literally right across the street from the French Broad River. And when it floods, it floods. And oh my goodness gracious. I remember driving home yesterday, or at least riding home from school yesterday. I saw how high the river water was. It almost flooded the entire road on the bridge. It was that high up. And oh my goodness. I honestly have never seen the river that high before. I mean, I've seen a lot of floods in my time, in my life, but oh my gosh, this one was one of the worst. There's not really much else I can say except the teams had to cancel practices. I know Brevard's cross country team suspended practices yesterday due to the flooding. I think volleyball practice. I don't think the volleyball team had practice yesterday. Um, and even if they did, it might have gotten canceled. I don't know. And of course, I've already talked about football team. They were already suspending operations for the week due to COVID. Um, and I believe soccer was also suspending their operations as well. Um, of course, yesterday was an extremely devastating day when it came to the weather factor, and as a result, it led to a 2 hour delay for regular school operations, and it led to the cancellations of many practices for sports teams all across this area. Um, I'd say probably the worst of it affected teams like Rosman, Brevard, Hendersonville, West Henderson, East Henderson, maybe Polk County, maybe North Henderson. Teams like that. Basically, most of the teams that are in the southern portion of Western North Carolina, like Murphy, Hayesville, or even Smoky Mountain for that matter. I mean, it left a devastating impact on our sports teams. And the fact that this happened, according to Transylvania County standards, 3 days after, no, 2 days after the first day of school, is just a wild way to start a year. Am I right? But enough with me yammering on. That is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, my fellow YouTube divers. This is Water 122 signing out. Ready to dive into more fun on YouTube. Thanks for watching.